Well. Very good afternoon to you, and sorry to be just a moment late. It's been really complicated trying to log in to Facebook and get it to connect. So I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I hope you've already begun to munch your lunch and you're doing all right today. It's a wet one here in Canterbury, and I must admit that I'm fairly off form. I'm really pleased to have had my second jab late on Wednesday, but the side effects only started to kick in last night, so I'm still got a bad headache and feeling a bit woozy, but I wanted to still do this and say hello and thank you for watching now or in the future. So today will be perhaps a bit simpler as I'm in a sort of haze, and I still wanted to come on and share some music with you, but all I've got today is this piece of paper to talk through, but some gorgeous pieces of music. So a bit less didactic today, a bit more personal possibly, I don't know. Interesting times again. We've got the football coming up on Sunday. I'm not massively a fan, but I'll watch it. I think, like all musicians, I've found the sight of the crowds dancing, singing and being raucous quite galling when we think about the restrictions that amateur singers have still been under. But I don't want to be too sour about that, especially as we're coming up towards some more relaxation. But I also have some foreboding about the extent of the relaxation and the rapidity of it. I also watched some Glastonbury sessions on iPlayer, and it struck me really forcibly watching the crowds from the before times, just how popular music, rock music, pop music is, and what a mass experience of emotion it can be. And again, mixed feelings, because I like a lot of that stuff. I buy and listen to it. I've never been to a festival. I would be frightened, I think, to be in such a big crowd, but it does feel sometimes like a sort of mass hysteria that sets in, or an amazing force of emotion, to put it more positively, and that adulation directed towards the stage. And part of me finds my sort of wondering, how does the musician, I saw some of Ed Sheeran's solo session, how does the musician cope with that amount of adulation and attention coming back towards the stage, and what a remarkable cultural phenomenon it is. And also, of course, I start thinking about the puzzling inability of more serious, complicated music, which I suppose expresses less direct and simple emotions, to connect with large numbers of people. As a proportion of the population. And some of that, I think, is to do with the way we police ourselves and the way we present the music. But some of it is because the product is complex and elite. And there's no point really pretending that a screaming crowd of thousands is going to rock up to watch, a Haydn string quartet. It's not going to happen. It's a different object. It needs introversion, focus, concentration, and you probably come to it when the time is right. But as I've said before, I'm frustrated that the ubiquitous availability of this stuff hasn't resulted in a greater propagation of it through society, partly because, and thinking from a British context, I think the educational base of music appreciation has been decimated in the last 50 or 60 years, and particularly in the last 10. I think people don't get a chance to sing together. They don't go to community spaces where they sing. They don't go to church where they sing. Whatever you think about the church, the community and creative aspects and the fellowship of that have been lost. And music is very much a consumer product. So the consumption of music, driven by profit, has overtaken the idea that music is a sort of ground up thing that you sing while you're working, while you're in company. I think most people now don't feel empowered to sing, and they consume their music passively. And I think for musicians, how to make music people's possession again is a huge quandary, really, because otherwise it just goes off into those policed spaces. And there's something even more cringy, and this is where we get to, of course, with proms which bend too far towards the populist for some people, or orchestras that go into nightclubs, all laudable and interesting, or flash mobs that go into spaces unexpectedly and almost impose their love of a particular kind of music on strangers. All of this, of course, is a sign, a symptom of the anxiety of irrelevance that musicians feel. And what is, I think, difficult to accept about that is that if you love this stuff, you know how profoundly it digs into the human heart and what it can make you feel. You know, the intensity and the joy and the sorrow of that stuff is all there, and it belongs to all of those people if they want it now, because most of the institutions which commissioned it have been weakened or have gone. I'm thinking of aristocratic courts and chapels and so forth, and this music has been democratized, but the market isn't there. So that's just a really commonplace thing to say, isn't it? There's nothing original about that. But how do we get out of our technological individuality and the way we consume music in a mass way? How do we get back to make it sure that music can represent identity for large numbers of people, and that they see that this is their possession? So, for example, to me, English music has its very special roots from Dunstable onwards through the Inquiry Book, through Tallis, up to Elgar and Howells, and on through Finzi and maybe into the Beatles. But let me not stretch the point. But there is a character and a lyricism, a nostalgia, all of which goes with the national character, and all of which is available to people to help them make sense of their identity, who they are and how they came to be here. And what's more, all of those other parallel identities are available from the globe by dint of the way that technology can give it to us through streaming and YouTube, whether we want to go to a concert and pay for it or not. It's a whole other thing which I've talked about before. So in a sort of glum, slightly hazy mood, I suppose I've been thinking about those formative moments, and that's what's driven my choices today for the moments to share with you in the listening room afterwards. Those moments when you are beguiled and bewitched and enchanted into me. And for me, I was receptive to it, but I don't know why. And then I want to think a little bit about how that love of the emotional effect of music and how it floods you with feeling, and it makes you feel more alive and more realized, actualized in your life, how that then often comes into conflict with the way we do music, both for ourselves and for other people. And by that, I would say an obvious example would be performance anxiety. You know, we might come to music as a form of emotional release and expressivity, especially if we're an introverted person, and we find that music gives us this wonderful ability to articulate ourselves without fully revealing ourselves. It lets us wear a cloak like an actor. And then we find that we're on stage and we're in front of other people who have the capacity to judge what we do, and we feel exposed and vulnerable, and much more than we would have if we hadn't started doing all that music stuff. And I think that this can be very destructive. It's like lactose intolerance setting in once you've established how much you love cheese, you know, and you can't get enough of it, but you also find it damages you. And I think a lot of musicians' bodies actually are damaged by their stress, which comes from this dissonance between their love of music and what they practice and what they have talent for, and then the way they have to deliver it. And I mean through mental health. I mean the number of musicians I know who struggle with alcohol, that kind of thing. I think there can be a level of stress in the profession, and this partly comes from the way that we police and judge the product that we're receiving. So fear of judgment, I suppose, is a form of preemptive shame, and shame is such a terrible, drenching motivator for people to back away and be uncreative. It's the fear of being wrong or of being judged wrong, the fear of making an error or of people noticing. And one of the there is a whole carapace of critics and audiences and institutions which police how you can be and what you should do. And those things embody a certain ideology, a certain power structure of priorities about what music should be and how we should listen to it, and what even physical attitude is appropriate towards the music. And all of that judging can be a way of getting in the way of empathy. And I think empathy in the end is what music is. It's liquid empathy. I've come to feel that when you're singing or conducting or playing and you're in the flow of the music, what you're doing is connecting with other people and collapsing your sense of self into the collective, and often into a collective past and future. So you're connecting with other human beings who are present and not present, because the music lifts you out of yourself. Really great music. And I think empathy then is probably the antidote to judgment and therefore to shame. And as a conductor, I suppose I've been wandering about thinking recently, how can I make rehearsal experiences and I'm thinking particularly of workshops where we're trying to be creative and experimental and not goal directed towards the urgency of a ticketed concert particularly. I still think these things apply, but I think workshops are the place to try them out. How can you encourage people to feel confident to be themselves and to be vulnerable with you? I mean, this has all gone a bit therapeutic, but to allow them to be creative and not to stop themselves taking the risk of showing themselves in the music. Because if you want creativity, you're going to want a bit of risk. Even in a polyphonic choir, even in a big choral work, what you want is all the individual's energy blazing into the music and not being guarded by, what does this person next to me think of what I'm doing? What does this person in front of me conducting think of are they about to leap on me and crush me down for error? What does the audience think? What does the critic think? And so forth. So you only learn, as they say, through failure. Now, I'm not suggesting, of course, that we then get reckless and invite all the errors and incompetence into the... I think I'm saying that we need really good ingredients to start with, right? People who've done their prep, who understand about breathing and standing and supporting for that kind of music. That's how we're going to sing it. But once we've got the ingredients assembled in ourselves and we bring them together, what we want to do is to stop worrying about the nature of those ingredients, the quality of them. So the base ingredients are good. People have looked at their scores. They've worked on their technique and their attention, and they're ready to engage. And it's then that you want people to let go of those things and be creative in the moment. And I think music, classical music, is one of the most over-policed and fearful arenas. I think the judging can be very strict. So I don't really know where I'm going with this because it's really quick thoughts, but this is preoccupying me. And I suppose I would be interested in the comments, which of course I will read afterwards. I would like you to talk about how you police yourself, consciously and subconsciously, if you really think about it honestly. How much are you judging yourself, and how much do you find yourself avoiding taking risks and contributing in a more full-bodied way because you're worried about the person who might step in and ridicule that or shame you into doing it? And I think Simona just made a really good point, because she's saying what you want is for responsibility to be shared. And actually, that goes with, doesn't it, taking the authority away from the policing person and the fear of them, and making it much more level and saying we are making in a shared enterprise this creative thing in the moment. And I suppose for conductors, the challenge is, how often do you impose yourself and demand because of the circumstances, and to what extent do you accept the creativity of the people in the room by allowing them to be empathetic with you, by inviting them to be themselves and to contribute. This is all a bit meta, isn't it? I suppose I'm talking about rehearsals where people don't feel fearful of what the conductor or the audience will say, or in a concert, and they feel the ability to be creative, and they don't come out of the rehearsal sort of wound up and suppressed. But I'm reading some of the comments. We're back to the parrot, the evil parrot that constantly tells you you're not entitled to be there, you're not good enough to be there. And you're right, other singers can also be very rude. I've heard of and actually witnessed people turning to others and saying something. And of course, that's a particular problem in scratch groups, where actually everyone has the equal right to be there, and there hasn't been a gatekeeper to say this voice isn't going to fit this choir, or your musicianship is insufficient, and they've paid the same as the person next to them. And of course, what you get then is the jostling of all the people's different ideas and hopes for what that session will be like. And people then feel resentful that their envisaged week that they're going to have has actually turned into a bit of a grind, because there's this person who's constant. And how should the conductor handle that? So all of these things, how do you... I would honestly say, that at music college or in a degree course, there should be a whole module on things that aren't currently taught about how to manage yourself and other people, because the emotional intelligence of conductors is totally neglected as a thing to study. It's just assumed that as long as you get on with the music, everything will be fine. But those brusque exchanges that have to happen in public between musicians, let's say you're preparing for an evensong, you've got to say things. You've got literally seconds to sort things out, and you're late. That's wrong. Now, how do we take criticism? How do we make criticism? How do we resolve conflict and different approaches in a way that... And how do we deal with singers' emotional needs? And I think often these things are really neglected, and sometimes they don't come in the same package. The conductor isn't necessarily a great people manager with high emotional intelligence. One of the things I've noticed as I've got older is my understanding and empathy with people's varying conditions of health and mental well-being has greatly improved. And when I was in my 20s and 30s, I had no idea of the range of conditions and tragedies and problems that can beset people. And I often felt a bit impatient about people who were unable to do something or join in or look up or, just be with me. And I think as you get older, you realise people are frail and they bring stuff into the room with them. And while as a conductor, you cannot possibly deal with that baggage, those things, what you need to do is it's got to be okay for those people to be there and make as much of a contribution as they can. So I hope those are helpful thoughts. I've gone back really with my music choices today to look at three pieces that really move me. One is the Purcell, Hear My Prayer. And we all know that piece, I'm sure, already. Almost everybody watching will have sung it. And the reason I pick it is because for me, it was one of those moments which crystallized something absolutely chemical and fundamental in me, which was that I was completely mesmerized by the power of a body of people singing together in a space. I came across this as a teenager on a residential course where I was playing the violin, which is my first instrument, and we were under John Lubbock, and and there was a compulsory choir, which I thoroughly resented. And I was messing around. I don't think I was a good student. I didn't take it seriously enough. And we did Harris, Fair as the Heaven, which I adored. The waves of music just undulating over each other. Again, a very physical experience of the sound washing over you. I'd just been at a school that didn't have a choir. And I also had gone along with a lot of the pretty dismissive and sometimes bullying attitude of my friends at the school, who thought music was pretty sissy and, to be looked down on, and that any emotionality was going to be bullied out of you. And I well remember stupidly asking in a music GCSE lesson why a section of the Mozart slow movement in Symphony 40 had made me cry while I'd been listening to it. I used to lie on my mono turntable, watching the LP and the needle rise and fall because it was a little bit warped. And this long sequential passage had just drawn tears. And I stupidly said, "So what is that?" It's a sequence, I know now. And at this point, the whole class jeered. My pencil case was thrown up into the lampshade and never came down. And I didn't make the mistake again, really, of revealing that I'd had an emotional response to that music. But when I got to this summer course, which was at Benenden School. There was a fantastic man called Derek Blease taking the compulsory choir, who was on the surface an almost clownish entertainer, but it didn't take long before you realised he was profoundly serious about what we were doing and profoundly serious about getting everybody to contribute and sing. And when we sang those pieces, the Harris, Fair is the Heaven and the Purcell, not only did I massively enjoy the rehearsals, partly because of his character and enthusiasm, but I gradually started to enjoy them because of what I could contribute and what I could hear and feel around me. And in the final concert, on a hot summer's day with parents watching around the walls, we sang this with certainly more than 100 children. In my memory, it's several hundred, but it probably wasn't. A vast, rumbling, rather motley choir, probably. And this music is, as you know, it's based on two simple motifs, and it just builds up to this amazing tense climax with all these suspensions overlaid. And I just remember tears suddenly starting at the climax and feeling wobbly all through my body and realising that this was incredible. This was a force I'd never experienced viscerally like that before. And it was the music and the experience of being within it that I was just taken by surprise. And I wanted it, of course, again. I couldn't find it again very easily because I went back to the school with no choir. But I've never forgotten the feeling. And I think it's these fundamental flames that keep you going in music, don't they? Where you are suddenly swept off your feet by the music. And you can go back to those moments when you're uninspired. And the other choices I've made, the Josquin in particular, one or two of you watching may have been there in Italy. It was a private group, and the group was motley again. And actually, we were tired and hot and a bit irritable, I would say. It was several days in, and people had kind of, I suppose, come to terms with the fact that it was going to be imperfect all the time because we had a particular style of group. But they were musical and they did really engage. And that's the key for me, you see. I don't need perfection. In that situation, what I want is the energy and concentration to be going into the music, and you can feed off that forever because we're all there for the right reason. And we went into this confraternity chapel and sang that Agnus Dei of the Josquin, Missa L'homme, sexti, toni. And all of us knew that this was an amazing moment. And there are others in my life I've experienced, but this one I particularly remember the feeling of being drawn out of my shoes, of being lost in forgetting that I was conducting, and this sense of it's a very romantic idea of sublimity and flow, but I would say whatever kind of idea it was a physical experience and a spiritual one. And these glimpses of something other, something numinous, something beyond, are awe-inspiring and humbling. And they came about not because I conducted a brilliant session. Actually, I was a bit grumpy and I was struggling. I was hot and uncomfortable. But because suddenly, in that moment, things crystallized and everybody's energy went into that enterprise. And they all realized they were part of something greater than themselves. And it's those moments as a conductor that will nourish you through 1,000 hours of everything else, mediocre to brilliant. You don't always get the feeling even at the best concert. Sometimes it's the humblest moment. Okay, I've spoken enough, but I hope that's of some interest. And I really will continue to think about how to balance the judgment and discipline that's necessary to make good things happen with a group against the need not to crush creativity and to instill shame of judgment in singers is, I think, something you can never really get quite right. But I think if your intentions are good, then you are striving towards the right ideal. If you're available, come in and come in and look at a couple of pieces of music with me, I'll just play extracts of the 3 videos. The third one being the Gjeilo, Ola Gjeilo, who improvises in what is paradoxically a highly formal video, but makes something highly emotional out of his own piece of music. So I'll stop streaming to Facebook now. I will paste the link again, which I believe sort of disappears in a thrice. So I'll try and do that in a moment, he said rather incompetently. And if you've got the link, it's at the top of the comments, and it's also in the description of the video. It's at the bottom where it says at the side donations, and then you see more, and you click, and the Zoom link is at the bottom of my list of recommendations. I hope you can find it. I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay.